The Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium presents Dane Cervine and Dave Sullivan, recorded live via Zoom on July 17, 2021.
I think that lockdown and the pandemic and all that we're going through have forever changed our world. I'm not sure quite how that's going to go, but it's definitely different from what it was 2 years ago, definitely different from when we were meeting in person before we started doing this via Zoom. So as we do each month with our wonderful poets, I'd invite you just to sort of forget the world and all that's going on, forget the stress, forget the strain, forget the Delta variant and all of that stuff, and just sit back and relax and lose yourself in wonderful poetry. It's a great way to really connect with yourself and with our poets and with each other. All of this being brought to you by the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium, which, as many of you, almost all of you know, is an affiliation of poets from really originally the Monterey Bay area, but now really all over the country. And the consortium has been presenting readings for many, many years in its current iteration and in prior incarnations. It was connected with the National Writers Union many years ago, and it was founded before then, that is, its predecessors were founded before then by other local poets. The consortium is under the leadership and the guidance of the dean of our group, John Lowy, who's with us today, and it's great to see him. The consortium is on Facebook at Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium, and I think you're all friends of that Facebook page. If not, please ask to be friended, and you will. That's all you need to do. And we are on YouTube under Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium. We have a YouTube channel, and we have some of our Zoom recordings on there. We're going to get the rest up. As I say, we're going to have a real push to do that in a couple of weeks. And you'll be able then to experience the poetry readings we've been having on an ongoing basis whenever you want. Today, we are joined by two wonderful, outstanding poets who are making a return appearance, as I said, via Zoom. They're gifted and they're just great to be with, and they're great to, it's great to read and to hear their work. Dane Cervine and David Sullivan. Each of our poets, as in the past, is going to read for 20 to 30 minutes. David is going to have, as he did last time, some images for us to look at while he presents his poetry. Each of our poets has a website, and they will tell you about that and ways to obtain their books if you'd like them. So let's get going. Sit back. I hope you've got a cup of coffee or tea or a glass of wine or something, and enjoy yourself and listen in. We're in for a great afternoon. And our first poet is Dane Cervine, who's in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. Dane has a new book, The World is God's Language, and it's just been published by 16 Rivers Press. His recent books include Earth is a Fickle Dancer, and The Gateless Gate, Polishing the Moon Sword. His poems have won awards from Adrian Rich, Tony Hoagland, the Atlanta Review, Caesura, and he's been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes. Dane's work appears in The Sun, The Hudson Review, Tri-Quarterly, Poetry Flash, Catamaran, Miramar, Rattle, Sycamore Review, Pedestal Magazine, and others. He lives in Santa Cruz, where he tells us the weather is nice and mild today, sunny and bright. And he has a website which was set out on the brochure, the flyer that was distributed earlier. It's I won't read it out to you now, but if you like it and would like to, please contact me and I can send you that link if you don't have it already. So that's it, folks. Dane, you're up. Thank you very much for being with us.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Can everyone hear me okay? I really want to appreciate and thank this Monterey community, our sister city, so to speak, and for all the work that each of you do to support poetry in this region. On an afternoon like this, it does feel pretty intimate. Faces I recognize, and it'll be an afternoon of hanging out together with poetry. Also wanted to appreciate 16 Rivers Press, which I'm a somewhat new member of, for publishing this book, The World is God's Language. I discovered the press after a 20-year run that the 16 rivers represent all the rivers flowing into the Greater Bay. And it's a cooperative press that I feel privileged to be a part of now. You can peruse their website anytime, just type in 16 Rivers Press. And if you want to find me, the nice thing about having a strange name is I'm apparently the only Dane Cervine on the planet. So just type in my name, Dane Cervine or Dane Cervine Writes, and you'll find my website without having to memorize all that stuff. So I thought I'd start with just an acknowledgement of, this is my first prose poem collection of prose poems, frankly, inspired by the work of Gary Young over the years. And so it's a different kind of book for me, and I really have appreciated a press helping me to bring all that together. The title, which may sound a little weird, since I do have an evangelical Christian background and a whole bunch of preachers going back to eternity, is not that. It's a Simone Weil quote, and she was a French philosopher and mystic and political activist who was very engaged with the world and still found in the face of a daunting world the ability to say attention is prayer. And that's kind of the spirit of these little haiku-like prose poems. The other inspiration is an interesting guy, a Buddhist teacher named Kukai many years ago, who taught that the world itself is made up of a pictorial alphabet of image letters known as monji, spelling out the universe to any who would read it. So in the spirit of those people, I offer some of the poems in the book. I'll start with, been doing a lot of readings lately, so try and vary the poems. And it begins with personal stories. Some of you know some of mine. This begins in, actually, you mentioned Houston. My dad's first pastorate was in Houston when I was a little tyke, and then migrated to Atwater. My dad lasted only 3 years as a minister before he became a teacher of junior high school kids in Delhi. A tough audience. But I remember as being inspired by him. There's something of that legacy that ended up with me as a poet. So this is called Salvation's Weight. It was in Bible school. I was just old enough to sit with the adults, watch my father, see how it was done. When it came to God, my father had a true feeling for the matter. His face would squinch up, one eye would close, and he'd speak as though dragging heavy buckets up from a deep well. We are saved by grace, not works, he would say, but it seems like work, this grace in the cavernous dark, lifting each excavated word to light, watching it evaporate in the air. My son Gabe, who's a spoken word poet, and I reflect from time to time that we probably never quite left behind all of that legacy. We've just become poets and speaking about the world in a different way. The first part of the book has personal history poems, and then it moves into travel and commentary about the world, but staying with my experience in the hot Central Valley. My first job after working at a library was in the tomato cannery, and then a psychiatric ward, which started me on my career. This poem is called Bruised. When I was 20, I started work at a psychiatric ward. After 3 summers in the tomato cannery, the mending of bruised minds appeal. No rejects crushed into paste, each red heart cupped, soothed, repaired. But on my first day, the nurse whispered that the head psychiatrist had hanged himself at home that morning. There are hidden blows. You must first save yourself. That was one of my earliest exposures, I think, to kind of a combination of my trajectory as a therapist and as a poet and trying to understand what I was facing in life. I thought I'd read along a similar trajectory about how you move out into the world and learn. I made it through graduate school. I became a therapist. I was, after all my 20s and living in the mountains and thinking about spirituality, I was trying to become a good career person, become a therapist. And my brother took me out to Modoc County when the Rainbow Gathering passed through. There's something very haunting about that. So this is called the Rainbow Gathering, Modoc County, 1985. After graduate school, my brother took me to a remote corner of Nevada where we pitched our tent next to a pair of rainbow women, nude except for a feather here, a crystal there. Democratic latrine pits in the open air, no one able to hide their shit, food for the asking, mushrooms, spirits, after not a shred of garbage left anywhere. But it was the circle at dusk, a mile-wide circumference of Om that still haunts, how at the edge of the meadow, the plateau plummeted far down toward a town below. I live with this memory like a ghost wind. As a therapist, I'm really struck by the notion of the ghost limb. There's probably some kind of original womb-like or idealistic experience that stays with all of us as a kind of ghost limb, and learning to live in that and with that. So moving up to Mariposa, some of you know my family moved up there. My dad built the village of Shangri-La, a bunch of little Japanese style hexagons. And after he passed away, my mom still lived up there. And this is called Surprise. The big oak is down. It fell slowly, shallow roots easing the great giant across the Japanese garden into the snow without a sound. My mother, working in the forest a short distance away, returned to find the behemoth fallen just so, her house intact, one Buddha statue sitting serenely next to the big, huge trunk, but another with its head knocked off beside the broken Torii gate. Became kind of a Zen practitioner, Buddhist practitioner, and there's something about the clarity of sometimes the tree will knock your Buddha head off and sometimes it'll miss and save your house. That's kind of the nature of the beast. So that inspired this next poem too, called Trusting the World. What is it that we can trust? This is also set among the hexagons in Mariposa. Winter morning, visiting my aging mother in her forest home. I step into the outdoor redwood shower, close the wooden sliding door. Down falls a tiny black bat, wakened from sleep. Pummeled by the steaming water till my hand can reach the knob, it looks as befuddled as I am. Enfolding the wet bat in a towel, I lay it outside on the deck, watch it shudder, Its pulsing lungs work, its small wings weakly stretch. Later, after a walk past the fallen oak, the trickling snowmelt, the hazy sun's warmth, I return to find the deck empty, trusting that the bat has become prey for cat or found its way again under the dark eaves. I just returned from my first, I was telling folks before we started, my first airplane trip since the pandemic. My wife and I and family went to her hometown in Madison, Indiana. Her mom had passed away during the pandemic, so we hadn't been able to go out there, and finally did, to have the memorial service. It reminded me of when her dad had passed away previously. It was after a bout of the slow beginning of Alzheimer's and dementia. And he was an amazing person who saw things that we didn't. And so it inspired this poem called The Unseen. My wife circles the winter pond in Madison, Indiana, having spent the day with her father in the adjacent nursing home. He knows his daughter, but grabs at thin air to touch a fruit tree, a dog, a tombstone no one else can see. Marvels as she walks right through them. She tells me this as her words rise invisibly through the cold steam of her breath to travel via cell phone towers to my ear in California. Though I can't see her, I know she is there. And kind of on that note, I turned 65, July 9th. So we're very proud of my little Medicare card and, you know, the passage of time. And but it does bring us into a new season of life. And my aunt and uncle had built a house near my parents up there until he, when he was playing tennis into his 70s, kind of discovered that he had liver cancer. But he was very gracious and familial oriented through it all. And so I wrote this poem called Practicing, based on a conversation that he had. Practicing. I'm practicing dying, he said to his daughter in his last days. I slowly stop breathing to see what it's like, then let go. His words almost eager. I think I can do this. The way a young boy steadies himself on the cliff bank over a river, gnarled rope in hand, leaps. So talking about the invisible, you know, being a spiritual person and a therapist and a poet, it gets very confusing sometimes which identity and which voice you know, I'm experiencing. But when there's a section of poems about Bali, which we visited with my kids several times, and the invisible is everywhere present in art. And so this is just one or two of those poems. This one's called Invisible Threads. The old man on his haunches, scythe in hand, cuts tufts of grass, handful by handful, near the rice field. 10 kites of gold and red float in wind far overhead. The strings that tie them to earth, invisible from here. And then in Bali, there's probably more life and death more close at hand than in comfortable life in parts of this country. And this poem is called Strange Beauty, watching the kids in the forest. Our Bali guide brushes his hand over the bark of the jackfruit tree, shows us knife marks children have made. They collect the sap that oozes from the womb on long, thin branches, and then stalk dragonfly. After, they run laughing to mothers with their delicious prisoners, roast them over coals, pop crackling dragons into open mouths. It is a lush world, each wound a strange beauty. In the book, there are a number of poems kind of about what we were talking about before the reading, climate change and the unavoidable nature of nature around us. Several of the poems have been in different climate-related anthologies that are, as you know, more and more becoming prevalent, and I think that's a marvelous thing. This one, I'll read, I've read some of the other ones. I'll read this one, Gated Communities. Maya Kings, Norse Greenland Lords, Easter Island Chiefs. In the long run, they merely bought the privilege of being the last to starve. When the final Brazilian forest is gone, the Arctic melt lapping our porches, sweet air sour everywhere, who will punch the last code into the last pointless gate, opening, then closing with a final bolted clank. I think I'm going to finish with two poems. The one of the ones in here, kind of a nod to my interest in Buddhism and reading history. This is called "The Empty Hand Holds the World." I was fascinated by discovering this. For the first 500 years, the Buddha was represented by an empty seat, a tree with no one beneath it, a pair of footprints. Tathagata, one who is thus gone, hence able to contain the whole world. Greek settlers in India turned him into a statue, a stone hero, rather than wind or earthquake or inconsolable rain. And then I'll just read one. I like to throw in on that note poems occasionally from, it's hard to see, it's The Gateless Gate, Polishing the Moon Sword. It's a integration of my Zen practice with poetry, because my teacher at the time, John Tarrant in the Pacific Zen Institute up in Santa Rosa, very much works with the arts, and told me, "Oh, you're a poet. Go write some responses to the ancient koans, just like all those Chinese people did." And I was like, me, really? So anyway, this is just one example. It's koan number 8 of the 48 koans of the Gateless Gate. It's called Kaichu's Wheel. Japanese and 2 different Chinese versions of these names all change depending on the translation or reading. So I'll read the koan and then my poem to end out the reading. Kaichu, the first wheel maker of China, made 2 wheels of 50 spokes each. Now, suppose you removed the nave uniting the spokes, what would become of the wheel? That's koan number 8. So I wrote a poem called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. If you remember that old book, it's kind of about the disappearing self. The orange paperback book still fits in the back pocket of my jeans. I glance at the well-thumbed pages when remembering the art and science of no self. But by now it's second nature, this dismantling of the entire machine, every piston, gear, bolt, the leather seat, the chrome handlebars, the immense road-hugging rubber tires, the immaculate silver spokes radiating from the center hub like lightning. All of it laid across the cement floor of the monastery of my mind, to be cleaned, polished, re-oiled, put back together as the comfortable cruiser this old speed demon body has become. Gone the glory days, mano a mano drag races, careening towards the black and white flag, the woman with the jade eyes at the finish line. There's nothing there behind the flag, the iris, the center of anything. But oh, this ride, there's nothing like it. Wind, trees, the road in the rearview mirror, the road ahead, the road right under my feet like thunder. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful, Dave. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was just, it was just great. And,
My pleasure. And since you asked us to do this, I'll just make a note. If you happen to want to find this book, you can go to the 16 Rivers, just Google 16 Rivers Press, and you'll find the book. If you want a signed copy, just email me. It's just my name at cruzio.com, or you'll find it on my website.
great. Well, I'm sure a number of us will be doing that. And thank you for that. I remember that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a well-worn copy on my shelf back home. And
isn't that funny? Yeah.
That's a neat book. And thank you. The notion, you talked about the unseen and the invisible. What you did was made things seen and visible for us through your poetry. Thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that.
You've taken us through a wonderful tour. I want to get your book and I want to read it. I was intrigued when you talked about the big oak tree falling and taking off a Buddha head, or maybe not. And I guess the question would be, if you weren't there or anybody wasn't there, would it have made a sound when it fell? And so pardon that, but I couldn't help.
That's way too deep for me.
Just one hand clapping, right? And then of course you're touching there for us on gated community. People at the top of the heap buying the privilege of just being the last ones to starve. And I think we've had a little too much of that of late, and somehow we need to be working to reverse that. And, thank you for calling that to our attention. So great, wonderful. Thank you, Dane. Appreciate it very much. And now we'll have our next poet, David Sullivan, who's, as I said, been here before. I mentioned he's going to be showing us some images. Last reading, he talked about paintings by Bruegel, and that was a wonderful journey through the visual arts as well as his poetry. And he's going to be doing something similar but different. David is the Poet Laureate of Santa Cruz. His books include Strong-Armed Angels, Every Seed of the Pomegranate, a book of co-translation that he did. He's also done, translated from the Arabic in that regard. He's also done Bombs Have Not Breakfasted Yet and Black Ice. Most recently, David won the Mary Ballard Chapbook Poetry Prize for his book, Take Wing. And he's also recently published Black Butterflies Over Baghdad, doing so with WordWorks Books. He's prolific and he is a wonderful poet and writer. He teaches at Cabrillo College, where he edits with his students the Porter Gulch Review, which is a marvelous, wonderful review of poetry and prose and images, photographs and painting. He lives in Santa Cruz with his family, and he has a website, which is listed in the flyer that went out to everyone. And if you don't have that, please email me and I can get that to you. So David, thank you for being with us. We look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and that notion of awareness of the wider world and the discrepancies and the inequalities is so crucial and something that's really come to the fore, I think, over this last year and a half. And Dane, your poems and the compassion and the reaching out and trying to understand others is such a part of your work that I really admire. I'm going to read, I've got a book coming out end of October. I'll do reading at Bookshop Santa Cruz, actually in person, which is kind of nice. But since we're on Zoom, I get to share some images. So this book, Black Butterflies Over Baghdad, my second book I've written about Iraq, and a lot of it is after I finished my book, Every Seed of the Pomegranate. I had various Iraqi poets and artists approaching me and asking if I could work with their materials. And so this kind of slowly accreted over the last few years. I'll just first share the cover of the book. Is that image showing up on your screens? The image is from a LA artist. He immigrated from Iraq quite a few years ago now, named Ghassan Gaid. And we actually, part of the reason this book came about is he asked me to work on writing poems to some of his artwork. And this is one of the images I found that I got to share for Black Butterflies and became the cover of the book. The book is largely trying to imagine my way into Iraqi experiences. There's a few about American soldiers, but mostly it's about Iraqis and the protests that continue in Iraq to try and reclaim their country, get rid of influence both from Iran and from the US, and get rid of corruption within their own government. The first poem in the collection is about, I don't know, the distance between me and there and what I'm trying to do in the poems. And it's based on a photograph that was sent to me by an Iraqi. And the poem is called Mosul Birthday. And in it, I kind of imagine a documentary crew going to Iraq and looking at something like this. So this is Mosul Birthday, based on a photograph an Iraqi friend sent me. Is the image up? Come to these rooms festooned with light. See how they've removed the roofs and most of the walls? Birthday streamers are draped high enough to avoid entanglement, and balloons bounce in winds. The blast popped only a few. Pull one down. See how long you and your documentary crew can keep it aloft. The floor's cracked plates could cut your feet. Even the body counts well hidden, except from those who knew their names, accepted Amal's birthday invitation. Where's the boy who was born on this day? He's that mark on the far wall beneath the black balloon. Never knew what hit him. Elegant to have those who would have mourned hardest die with him. And I'll stop the share with that image. It's interesting how images can conjure up whole worlds. And for me, it was me trying to also confront myself. And what am I doing? It's a strange kind of imagining into other lives and trying to do with as much respect as possible. Really a short poem. This is about Abu Ghraib and Major General. This is Major General Taguba at Abu Ghraib. And he's the one who did the most kind of damaging report back to the US, had a meeting with Rumsfeld. And afterwards he said, I thought they actually wanted to know what had happened. Major General Taguba at Abu Ghraib. Stuck shoe sucks half off as you cross the room where tongues were cut off, where screams were cut short, where electricity wasn't used to illuminate, but darken, and words invented for freedom sounded nothing like freedom. Don't switch on the light. Cross in the dark, like one of a million refugees fleeing from the night under cover of the night. Each lap of wet against boot sole slaps and pounds your ears like blood. exactly like blood. I was able to go to New York this is right before COVID hit, to see the Iraq exhibit that was done by MoMA PS1 in New York, an incredible collection of artwork and art books that were created by Iraqis, often under sanctioned circumstances, so with very few materials. One of the artists that donated a lot of the work is a famous Iraqi artist. If I can pull it up, I'm going to share with you the image that this poem's based on. Is that showing up? Large black and white with some red in the middle.
Yes, it's there, David. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Bob. This is a 50-foot long painting. And it's, I mean, kind of obviously taking off of Guernica and redoing it in an Iraqi context. It's quite extraordinary to be in front of it. I'll describe it in the poem, so I won't go any further. This is Clouds Above No Man's Land, based on Dia al-Azawi's Mission of Destruction triptych. Obviously playing off of Mission Accomplished. 1. On the left, bodies stacked upon bodies overspill half of this 50-foot long painting. Their eyes, black wells. Some fall into the gray no man's land like broken statues, while from the right come a marching mass of uniforms sporting reflective sunglasses so onlookers see only themselves. 2. Some Iraqis carry wooden hay forks, but they're outmatched by rifle-mounted bayonets jutting from gloved hands. A dog barks at a boot. The dead seem to float, half real, half ghosts, as in the flat stone reliefs Assyrians carved to proclaim victories. Space between them's gritty, where the artist has rubbed in sand. 3. A few rise from the grayed field, twist towards enemy knives where a red plume of mist poses a question. Disembodied parts float like strange clouds. One severed hand lifts in a wave as if flagging down its owner. And as I was writing this, I was also working, I'd worked with Abbas Kadim, who used to live in San Jose, and we co-translated a book by Adnan al-Sayyid, who I got to actually meet for a week in London when I went and visited. After that book came out, it was published in London a while ago, Iraqi poets started to approach me and ask me to work with their poems. So I have a series of co-translations that I've done with poets whose English was good enough that they could work with me, or with Iraqi friends who gave me kind of a basic translation to work with. I think before I read that, I'm going to read one more. This is a short prose piece. Dane was making me think about prose, and Ken Weisner's here, and I think it was Ken who said, some of these sound more like prose. And it's good to break out and to realize that some of the preciousness of poetry, there's a way in which prose's directness and storytelling can be useful. And this one that came out, I think, partly because of that. And this is a true story. I visited Youssef in Salt Lake City and spent a couple of days with he and his family talking about his work as a translator for the American forces in Iraq after having served on the Republican Guard before he left. It's called Lost, Found. Up late with Yusuf al-Timimi, former interpreter, now living in Salt Lake City with his family. As the last candles pool, I ask, what's the hardest thing you saw? He had been called to Camp Taji's main gate about a suspicious package a woman was carrying. When he arrived, she was clutching a crimped over paper bag to her chest, and the men were yelling at her with their AKs. He made them stand down, then approached. asked what she had. She slowly unrolled it. Inside, the head of her son. She was asking the American soldiers to help look for the body so she could bury him properly. Yusef says, as she talked, she continued to stroke her son's hair. Hard to write, hard to read, and I imagine hard to listen to. But if we're going to have compassion, I think we have to compassion all the way through to the hardest things, both for what individuals go through, but what people suffer collectively as well. One way to do that for me was to listen to the voices as closely as I could by trying to work with Iraqi poets on their poetry. So I'm going to read a couple of the co-translations. And I don't speak any Arabic, so they really are, co-created versions of Arabic poems, trying to capture something of what the original may have as best I can. So let me read a couple of these from the collection. This is kind of the mid-section of the book, and I kind of grouped them all together. Here's a short one from Adnan al-Saig, the poet that I got to meet in London. It's called Art. I draw a tank, aim it at the general's balcony. I draw a cloud. This is my country. I draw a landmine, bury it in the language closet. I draw a spider, then crucify it on sorrow's door. I draw a picture of my father and ask, why did you leave me alone with the wicked? I draw a table, invite my childhood to sit. I draw a flute, then slip through its holes to remote villages. I draw a street and wander down it with my dreams in hand. I draw my heart, ask, where are you? And there's kind of a really dark humor to some of these poems. This is a poem by Kadam Kanhar. And it's a numbered section. It's called You Cannot Retrieve Your Deceased Because. 1, we don't know which bodies belong to you and which ones belong to them. And seeing as there aren't any heads. 2, there's a generation of wild dogs that grew up finding human flesh palatable. 3, when you are the only living body among the dead, the line thins between death and life. 4, what does it mean to drag a body out from under a carpet of flies? 5, one day in the distant future, there will be a news item about archaeologists who discover evidence of people who buried their dead piled on each other in one pit. They'll speculate about the existence of a headless human species with hands contorted behind their backs. It will be a minor news item. 6, why do you think we import bulldozers? 7, you can put headstones anywhere, roofs, streets, sidewalks, or on our backs. 8, we both know the rifle is an empty cup as we race to pour our hate into it. 9, we close the door on our fingers as we step down into our separate graves. Condem is dealing with heart problems. I actually haven't heard from him in a couple months, and it's quite common among the Iraqis that I've been in correspondence with, that they're dealing with health issues. And people have talked about it as weathering, what a Black person in this country or someone else deals with, the long-term generational trauma and how it impacts the body physically, as well as the mind. I'll read one more from this midsection. This is a short poem by Abud al-Jabiri. It's called A Phantom House. Be sure to lock the door, you say every night, like a merchant instructing his son. Maybe it's because you fear my ignorance about the minutiae of this house, which has no doors, no windows, and is occupied by no one. And every night, I train my curled-in fingers to knock on empty air, hoping I'll stumble on the front door so we might finally die. Quite surreal imagery, quite different from mine, which for me was a great stretch to be working with these poems and trying to find my way into them. I'll read a few from the third section of the book. And the first one, let's see if I can bring it up here. It's based on an image. So a friend of mine, Rawia, quite young, she's in her probably 22 or something now, an artist herself. And I asked, send me images of the protest you've been involved with. And so this is one, she just sent me the image first. And then I said, well, tell me about it. What's going on here? I'll pull it up on the screen so you can see it as well. And let's see, here it is, I believe. Is that up for you?
Yes, it's up.
Okay. So Rokia Hazim told me the story of Nova, and basically, I'll cover it in the poem, but it's a story of the mothers trying to help their sons and daughters who are going to protest and figuring out, what they can do to help out. And in this case, quite literally, it was washing the clothes of the protesters on the streets. Just gonna take a second because I'm scrolling through my phone since I can't see the poem since the photograph is up, but I'm almost there. Quite extraordinary. The young people in Iraq talk about themselves as the lost generation because many of them did not have schooling or had to drop out because of various reasons. Now there's a lot of prejudice against women in schooling. So a lot of the protests that have been fueled in Iraq has been a rejection of the current government, of the restrictions, of the sectarian violence, and of the division into Sunni and Shiite. And this is a little bit about that and the anger at trying to reclaim their country. Nova washing, Baghdad. My son came home from the protest with a bag balanced on his bent back and two tightened in each fist. Mother, these are from my friends in Tahrir Square. They need washing. I clucked at his recklessness, threw them in sudsy water and stripped the shirt off his back, handing him to wrap in a towel so he could remove the rest. Yes, I'd seen him naked, but that day he'd become a man. Later, my best friend Silwan came with me to the square, and we found a restaurant owner who let us set up washing machines. Mine from home, another she bought. These men needed mothers, so they brought us the sweat off their backs, the blood they'd shed, paint splatters from murals they'd plastered over the walls or on tuk-tuks, smoke from the police canisters they'd hurled back at those who wanted to damp down youth. But their dreams we couldn't wash out, the fear that adhered to the cloth, nor the dead and wounded and maimed. We could only wash out the stains, not what they'd seen, not what they dreamed. And it has been quite an education to be listening to these voices. I guess particularly because there's so little now in our news about what's happening in Iraq. As we've pulled out and don't have boots on the ground, we care less and less about what's happening. So trying to write my way into it is one way to try and make it matter again. This is called My Iraqi Friend Sends Me a Repeating Video Clip for Hussein Abdul Kalech. My Iraqi friend sends me a repeating video clip that shows a masked man on a gray choked street walking among smoke canisters that burn like angry eyes. And when a fresh one comes bouncing towards him, he, without missing a beat, steps past and back heel kicks it like a soccer ball, so the gray streak arcs over the police barricade. And for those 20 seconds that loop and loop, it seems easy to throw back all they throw. And as much as the focus on Iraqis, I do have a few poems here thinking about US soldiers. A lot of this started because my veterans, both of Afghanistan and the Iraq War, came back for classes at Cabrillo. I've had two Iraqi students, no Afghani students. This is a story that one of them told me. His clipped right wing. The macaw rises up the side of his body, wings back spread along collarbone and back, his whole shoulder given over to the rising bird, muscled fist of a head protruding where the amputation nobbled him. The bird's beak takes shape and turns cartilage's hard knots into bird squawk and flight as it lifts up, half leaving him. And the inked in feathers cascade down in shimmers of red and iridescent green waves where dyes stabbed skin, troweled in while he numbed the pain with vodka and weed. Never broken, never heal, reads the opposing shoulder. Macaw's head he ruffles with his one good hand, pet of no regrets. For all he's done, for all that's been done to him, flying into his arm's absence. And it does start to color my life. So this is a walk on a beach I took and something I saw and where my mind went. It's called Only a Metaphor. The ocean's thrown up desiccated kelp strands on this beach. Must be the weight that made retreating waters lay them out side by side like this. All their float bladders crowded at one end, crowned by hair-like strands that once held fronds aloft to catch sunlight, cutting waves. Blank-faced, swollen holdfasts look like dolls' heads. Brown kelp blades are undone dresses. When ISIS soldiers were done, they put them down like this, not even covering their crimes. Now the tide's reversing, pulling these tossed up doll things back to sea. The ocean's big enough, it can erase almost anything. I'll read two more. This again returns to US soldiers. It's called Day Prayer and it has an epigraph. Average number of suicides by vets in the US per day, 22. This day, let the air breathe. Let no one be misted pink. Let the planes drill through cotton-battened clouds and no one lose vision. Pull the muzzles out of soldiers' mouths. Remove big toes from the symmetric curve of a rifle's trigger or the pistols grown warm by a testing finger. Part lips that wet the cold barrel. Ease metal away from wrists. Let bridges be for walking over, not jumping from. Let the car stay on the road. Put the pills back in the bottle. Put down the razor blade. Shove fingers down the throat of your friend. Talk him down from his paranoia. Ask to hold onto his meds. Let every soldier sleep through the night, sleep in, not in a blackout drunk that doesn't end, but in a Winnebago on a fingerling of Florida. Let them be the first one up, making coffee that suffuses and mingles with the pop and smoke of bacon. And I'll go to the last two poems in the book. Chuck's in the room, and Chuck helped me out with this one. I had it as questions and answers, and he said, just write it simple. It's called To Do. Carry 2 buckets of salt down to the sea. Fling them in. Take actions that will leave no trace. It's not what you do that changes anything. It's the doing. Do it without a shout. Do it under cover of night. Watch granules sink and dissolve like fizzed stars. Like all acts, it should disappear into the elements it's most like. It should leave no mark. Then head back home. Fetch more salt. And the last poem is called Interrogation, inspired by the paintings of Shirwan Baran. And it's in 2 voices. So it's an Iraqi speaking, and he's being interrogated by another Iraqi connected to the current government. Interrogation. Why have you hidden the man's face? The paintings of the horse, not the man. Why is his cuff frayed? Does he represent the poor? He's a farmer, he is poor. Why did you paint the horse with nostrils flared? Horses widen their nostrils when smelling. Well, why are its teeth bared? It's slipping up the fig from the man's hand. Why does the horse's cheeks strain? Its muscles are working, extending around the brown fist of the fig. You've shown the ribs of its chest. Yes, a horse has ribs. Its eye seems crazed. Crazed is in the eye of the beholder. But it looks out of the canvas at us. While I painted, the horse noticed me. Then you admit it's about duplicity. It's about a horse, a fig, a man. You left out the artist. I try not to be in my work. So you admit you're in hiding. I admit it's a painting. Do not leave the country in case you're wanted for further inquiry. Then do not take the country from me. What was that? Or the horse, or the man. Do you want to go hungry? I want to grow kinder. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David. That was remarkable. That's incredible. That I kept thinking, I haven't seen the 50-foot long painting that you talked about, but I was thinking of the horse in Guernica.
Yeah.
Raining with nostrils flaring and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struck by, and I think we all were, by the quote you gave us at the beginning from the Iraqi general who said, and who spoke to Rumsfeld, I thought they actually wanted to know what happened. You know, and I don't think they did, and still don't. I remember when all this began, I was talking to a guy I know who's a general in the Pentagon, who was with the Southern Command and then was planning this thing. And I said to him, and it was public knowledge, I said, why? He said, oh, we're going to liberate, we're going to bring democracy. And I said, but who's going to pay for it? And he said, oh, we'll get all their oil. That'll pay for it. And of course, $3 trillion later, we didn't. The Chinese are getting the oil, and we didn't. And in the process, we created, as you said, a lost generation. And it reminds me of the consequences of Vietnam and Cambodia back when I was of draftable age. And it scares me in terms of what's likely to happen in Afghanistan. as the Taliban once again takes over.
I was inspired by Bruce Weigel's work in Vietnam. Not only was he a soldier in Vietnam, he goes back and then works with Vietnamese, translates Vietnamese poets. And he's been actually a great inspiration for people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And soldiers have turned to him, poet soldiers like Brian Turner. And he's been wonderfully supportive.
That's great. I mean, I know people who are still traumatized by their years in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Still wake up with night sweats all these decades later. You had the line, draw my heart, and then where are you? And I think what you did today was take us to our hearts with words that you said are hard to write, hard to read, and hard to hear. But I think we had to and we have to hear that sort of thing. I don't honestly know, and I don't know many people who do know, where we go, how we stop this sort of thing, this cycle from repeating itself. I remember reading of the British and what they did to the Boers in South Africa. I mean, it just, you know, it goes on. And you've captured so well the imprint of what we have done in Iraq, and the prices are still being paid. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on that cheery note, want to thank David for a wonderful set of poems that he gave us and images, and Dane for your wonderful set that you gave us too. It's been quite an afternoon, a rich one, and the heat that we've generated has been accompanied in here by light. It's not just the heat of what's going on outside in our world. So thank you all for being with us. Please come back. Our next reading is Sunday, August 8th with Catherine Petruccelli and Cheryl D. Huddleston. It'll be by Zoom. Jennifer Legier will send out an announcement. You can then respond to her. We will then send out the Zoom invitation. For more information about the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium and our wonderful poets, if you want, please feel free to contact John Lowy, who's with us today. We can give you his phone number if you'd like. And in the meantime, don't forget that we're sponsored in part by Old Capitol Books, which is, now relocated on Alvarado Street, Monterey. They've been good friends to us. And be sure to like us on Facebook. It's no big deal, but you'll get such news as we do put out. And please tune into our YouTube channel and subscribe to that if you'd like. And please come back next month. In the meantime, thank you all so very much, and continue writing and reading, reflecting, and living the richness of the life that we poets are able to do. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And in the meantime, Dane and David, if you could stay on for a little bit, I'll get a screenshot of our two poets today. Thank you all. Take care.